Okay, broadcasting live from the heart of Chamonix, France. It's the day after the UTMB. I am completely wrecked. My voice hurts. I'm joined, of course, by my great friend and colleague, Corrine Malcom. We're going to break down the action of the week. Corrine, good morning. How are you feeling?
Good morning. I was reflecting before we got on the podcast today, on the video today, about the fact that I think you are the only person I've really spent time with this week, and it feels really weird.
No kidding. Usually when I get to Chamonix, I'm able to adventure most of the day, or at least enjoy a race myself. This year was different. It was an endurance event of a different kind. You and I, again, had the pleasure to call the action of OCC, CCC, and UTMB, and we're going to spend most of our time on UTMB and maybe talk a little bit about those other races as well. But first, I think it's most appropriate to just start with where the week started. It started on a somber note. Corrine, just remind everybody what happened in TDS, the significance of it, and how it impacted the whole week.
Yeah, so the week got off to kind of a rocky start, I think, for everyone. I mean, the performances at the front of TDS were phenomenal to follow, but Wednesday morning, really, really early in the morning, there was an incident out on course that unfortunately cost the life of a young Czech runner. And, you know, it changed TDS. It kind of caused a kerfuffle in the middle of the week as far as like getting people safely off of the course while letting some of the race continue. But this runner's spirit was carried through every single race this week. They recognized him at the starts of OCC and CCC and UTMB. One of his friends read a super moving dedication at the beginning of UTMB before the start of the elite wave at 5 p.m. on Friday, and I think we were all in tears.
It was beautiful, beautiful.
And so,
tribute.
You know, it's one of those things where tragedy happens in the mountains. It's inescapable at times, but to watch the race embrace his spirit and watch the runners embrace his spirit and dedicate races to this individual, which we saw this week, I think speaks to the love of the community and the love of the mountains and the love of what we do. So I think the races moved forward smoothly, but he was on everyone's minds as we rolled into the rest of the race week.
No doubt, a tough way to start the week, but as you said, even though it was tough circumstances, it did bring everybody together, and that is one of the things that we all love so much about the community, is that we do band together in tough times, and that was the feeling in town this week, and that reading before the start of UTMB was incredible. So our thoughts go out to our Czech listeners and the Czech ultra runners who were here this week. And definitely we will all learn from this experience and we will all be better for it. But Corrine, I think we should transition now to lighter subject matter. And I think we should spend the bulk of our time here talking about the big race, the UTMB. And maybe if we have time at the end, we'll talk a little bit about TDS, OCC, and CCC, but UTMB was one for the ages this week. It's always one of the most exciting, dramatic races every year. It's always the most competitive race every year. This year was no different. Where do we even start? I think we should probably start with the women's race, where we saw potentially one of the greatest performances in ultra running history from the great Courtney Dauwalter, the great American ultra runner from Leadville, Colorado. Corrine, what are your reactions?
So I spent a lot of time this week talking about how Courtney was not satisfied with her 2019 result. And she won. She won the 2019 edition of this race. And so people are going to be like, how is she unhappy with that win? And it wasn't the win so much as what she was able to get out of herself on the course. She struggled a lot in the 2019 race and still pulled off a win. So to see her do what she's actually capable of on this course blew everyone away, blew the records away, blew the men's field away. She finished 7th overall, tying the best ever female overall result since Rory Bossio in her 2013 then course record performance. So again, Courtney ran 2 hours faster than in 2019 in a time of 22:30, I want to say.
Yeah, 22:30. Absolutely incredible.
Fast.
So Rory Bossio ran 22:37 on a course that we speculate is about 45 minutes faster. So the fact that Courtney was able to get under Rory Bossio's time, which itself is one of the greatest performances in ultra running history, it's just absolutely mind-blowing. Complete dominance from the American Courtney Dauwalter. And of course, Corrine, as we know, Courtney was coming off a disappointment at the Hard Rock 100 where she DNF'd. How do you think that impacted her psychology and her physical fitness?
But here's the thing. I don't know that Courtney views DNFs as these big rattling disappointments. We saw when she won in 2019, she DNF'd Western States that year due to an injury. She DNF'd Hard Rock this year due to, it sounded like, stomach issues that she just wasn't willing or couldn't overcome.
Yep.
They're hard. It's hard in the middle of the night to decide if it's worth pushing on when you feel that crummy. So I don't know that it rattled her. She went back to the drawing board. She tweaked her nutrition. She came into this with a game plan. We've seen her have eye problems in races in the past where she's gone it's called ultra blindness, which actually Tom Owens.
We saw her using the eye drops basically in every aid station throughout the race.
Yeah, and there were runners in races this week who experienced that as well. Tom Owens came off the course because he couldn't see in Courmayeur. Actually, Holly didn't believe him.
Wow.
And then Robert went to go check on him and he's like, no, Holly, he can't see.
Wow.
So yeah, we saw Courtney using eye drops at every aid station. She went into the night with clear glasses on. Beth Pascal did the same thing in part to protect their eyes, running through a super windy, cold night. So I don't think the DNF rattled Courtney. I think she's had confidence in her fitness going into Hard Rock and it just didn't work out. And so, she reset and came back here. She doesn't spend a lot of time here. She gets in, race week, generally speaking, and rolls right into the race. It's this very casual demeanor in a lot of ways. But I think it works for her. I don't think it rattled her. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, everybody who knows Courtney, one of the things we all love about her is that she doesn't take it crazy seriously. It doesn't seem like she carries this crazy sense of pressure, even though she is the best in the world. And she does come in with sort of a playfulness. And so Hard Rock, even though I'm sure it was disappointing, likely for a person of her disposition, wasn't completely shattering, but more so, it was a great 100K training run at altitude in the mountains in Colorado that set her up perfectly for the final training block leading into UTMB, where she came in and absolutely smashed it, winning by an hour and 40 minutes. And to put that in context, Courtney was only an hour and 45 minutes behind Francois Dane, the men's winner of UTMB. So that, of course, means that Courtney was as close to the men's leader as the second place woman was to her. An absolutely dominating performance from Courtney Dauwalter.
Yeah, incredibly impressive. And she led from the gun. She led up the climb out of La Zouche. She led Mimi Kotka for most of the race. And Mimi, the elastic broke at some point, and Courtney's lead became more and more and more insurmountable to anyone behind her.
Yep.
The story is that Courtney led from the gun. She did her own thing and she worked her way up through the men's race. We watched her in 20th and then 18th and then 16th and then 10th. And we were like, holy cow, she's going to be top 10. She was as high as 6th place.
Yep.
Only 30 minutes behind the 5th place male at that point. She was overtaken by the 6th place male ultimately before they made their way into Chamonix, but it gave them both their own finishes as well. They ended up being spread out just enough. And actually that finisher, his interview at the finish line was all about Courtney.
Right. Yeah.
Like how impressive she was and that she was about to finish. And so I thought that was a really cool way for
that was
Courtney
Hannah
to come in.
Snamberger, the German athlete who finished 6th place, recent Lavaredo champion, a great athlete in his own right, doing battle with Courtney Dauwalter in the late miles of the race. You mentioned Mimi Kotka. Her finish was incredible to watch. She went to the depths of the well. Of course, finishing third, Camille Bruyas, French athlete, finishing second, somebody who a lot of people consider to be sort of the future of female running here on the European circuit. Any other reactions from Camille, Mimi, or any further down the women's top 10?
Yeah, I mean, I thought Camille's performance was really impressive. She ran a really steady race and ultimately overtook Mimi, I think, in Valorsine. So kind of in that final 50K stretch. She is young. I think she's 29, if I'm not mistaken, but she's had a really good season and she's been in ultra running for a number of years now. So I think we're going to see more and more from her. I think they were all overwhelmed at the finish line. Like they had put it all out there and I don't think she expected to be second. But she was never, that far back. She ran steadily within the middle of the top 10 from the beginning. She ran with Beth Pascal for a long time before their split. I think she actually ran with Maybe it was Marion, the ultimate fourth place finisher for a long time as well, fellow Frenchman or Frenchwoman rather.
Yeah.
And then I will say that watching Mimi's finish, we had a camera on her from Cafe La Floria all the way into town, and you could see that every single step hurt.
It was yeah.
It was an incredibly emotional
the type of finish
experience.
where you really feel for the runner, where you're like, wow, that person has discovered the limit. So shout out to Mimi Kotka, very hard fought third place finish here. Corrine, one other thing from the women's race that was definitely rattling in my brain as we witnessed Courtney Dauwalter have such an incredible run, and then also considering Francois Dane's victory 6 weeks after the Hard Rock 100 was what was going through Sabrina Stanley's brain during this race.
Man.
Oh my goodness. Sabrina Stanley, of course, also the Hard Rock champion, just like Francois, decided to not start the UTMB this week, feeling that she just wasn't up to another 100-mile challenge this year. But of course, Francois was able to pull it off, and we witnessed Courtney Dauwalter put on one of the greatest performances in the history of ultra running, as we just mentioned. What do you think Sabrina Stanley's thinking, and how do you think her mindset is going to be set up for the 2022 race, where I'm certain she's going to be focusing on it 100%?
So I sent Sabrina a text Friday morning as CCC was getting underway, and I said, hey, let the next 24 hours light the fire for the next year. And so we took inspiration from Abby Hall's finish in CCC, our teammate, our fellow American, fighting for the entirety of the race, but also witnessing what was happening out on the UTMB course. And she's excited. We're all excited. I think you can't be here experiencing these races without every single female runner I've talked to here from the US who is, who's running at the professional level. They're all like, I'm ready to take this more seriously.
Yep.
That was the takeaway from every single runner I've talked to. They're all like, how can I do more?
Yep.
And so I think that is very indicative of what this week holds. And Sabrina is part of that group as well. She got invaluable experience from witnessing UTMB, witnessing how the race pans out, getting to see parts of the course, getting to watch, how the crowds interact with the runners and what the experience of being here on race week is like. Mm-hmm. Because coming into that blind could be really rattling.
Yep.
And so I think that she's been here for a month now. I think it's going to be good.
I think it's perfect for her, perfect also for Caitlin Gerben, who in my mind represents the future of female ultra running at the highest level, coming out of the US at least. And both of them were here. They got to experience the race. They got to witness these athletes performing at the highest level at the world's most important event. They were crewing their teammates and friends along the way. So that is invaluable experience for both Caitlin Gerben and Sabrina Stanley, who I sure hope step to the starting line in 2022. Corrine, let's transition to the men's race. Oh my goodness. Francois Dane pulled it off. Leading into the race, the past 6 weeks, as somebody who also recently finished the Hard Rock 100, I couldn't stop thinking, how is it possible that he could potentially win this race, and continually having to remind myself that you cannot doubt this man, and he proves it once again. He is the greatest long course mountain ultra runner in history, securing his 4th victory. Corrine, any reactions from Francois?
I mean, my reaction to the men's field is, wow, France really showed up. Just in general, just so everyone knows, the French men took spots 1 through 5. Okay, I don't think that's ever happened, let alone a sweep 1 through 5. That is a whole lot of the top 10. So I think that, yes, Francois' performance was incredible, but it was just like this wave of runners and a very interesting performance overall. I think that Francois' time, I don't know that he had to go to the well, is my take. I don't think, given the course conditions, we do know that they had a hard night. Talking to runners after the fact, it was cold out there at times. It was hard to see at times. I had dinner with Emily Hawgood super late last night after she finished her UTMB, and it was not easy, but the course was in good conditions and the daytime was in good conditions. So it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know that Francois had to go to the well for that win. And so it's like, it's hard in the context of the whole race.
He should have run faster.
Yes,
honestly.
I
mean, when we look at the times,
aren't that fast.
You look at the times from OCC, you look at the times from CCC, you look at Courtney Dauwalter's time, and it's just clear that, you know, the conditions this week were perfect. I would have expected the men's winner to go much faster than Francois did. There, of course, was lots of attrition in the race, which we'll get to here
on both sides
momentarily. But I mean, of course, we're not taking anything away from Francois. He ran the race that he needed to secure the victory. And yes, Corrine, as you mentioned, the top 5 men, Frenchmen putting on an absolute clinic here. The French on the men's side clearly right now have the deepest, most talented number of great athletes in the sport right now. Francois, of course, being at the top of that list, securing his 4th victory. He also has 4 victories at the Diagonal de Fou,
so
2
impressive.
victories at the Madeira Island Ultra, the John Muir Trail FKT, the GR20 FKT. He is just nearly impossible to beat on terrain like this when the distances are long and there's a lot of vertical climbing and descending. He's just the best. He's the best of all time.
I think it being the 4th win really solidifies his greatness. Not to say that was necessary to solidify his greatness in our sport, but I do think it's a very important part of it all. But yeah, I don't think the times were as fast. And I think here's the thing. There was attrition in both races, but there's always attrition in both races. And I don't think it's not fair to say, oh, your top 10 doesn't matter because there was attrition.
Of course.
Because they still had to fight their way through over 100 miles around Mont Blanc, running through the night, all of that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Right? There's quite a bit of a spread between 1st and 10th in both the men's race and the women's race, more so in the women's race. But it's one of those things where it's like, what happens if we could get more people past Courmayeur?
No kidding. I mean, we should talk about the attrition now then. I was expecting we would get to it in a few minutes, but this, I think, is another story of the race, as it has been the past 3 editions of the race. And it is unfortunate to see so many athletes not be able to make the full circumnavigation of the mountain and arrive back here in Chamonix. But that's definitely one of the storylines of the race. In 2017, the year that I ran it, there was almost no attrition. And that has sort of been the anomaly, at least in the past handful of years here at UTMB. And especially the last 3 editions, we've seen so much of the professional men's and women's fields succumb to DNFs out on the course. Any reactions to that? Obviously, we need to talk about the Americans in particular here. But, you know, any names that come to mind that didn't make it around the mountain who, you know, you were expecting more of, or who, you know, dealt with unique challenges out on the course?
Yeah, so when we look at who started the race for the U.S., the notable drops, I mean, include Jim Walmsley, Tim Tollefson on the men's side, on the women's
Tim Frericks
on the men's side. On the women's side, we've got Brittany Peterson ended up dropping, Hillary Allen ended up dropping,
Kelly Wolf
ended up dropping, and one of those things where it's like some of these athletes, I'm not sure if they went in with the intention maybe to. I think some people go in with the. Okay, here's the big thing with UTMB. This is kind of the overarching theme. I think it explains why some of these athletes end up dropping. I think people go into UTMB thinking it's their focus race, but then doing races or doing training in the build up to it that does not actually match that, does not actually say, hey, this is my focus.
Yep.
They race Western States, they race Hard Rock, whatever it might be. They race Lavaredo. Maybe that's an easier double. But it's one of those things where it's like, if this is your focus race, you have to come ready for it. And I think a lot of people get on the start line independent of being ready for it. We saw that with Mimi Kotka. She got to the finish line and the first question said, hey, like, how was it out there? And her response was, I had no business running 100 this weekend. Yeah. And I think that's the field. Oftentimes we come into this race with no business running 100. And so we get to Courmayeur, we get past Courmayeur. You get to Courmayeur, you're not going to see your crew until Champex-Lac.
Yep.
That is a long way to go if you're not feeling good.
Yeah, and you leave Lake Contamine, you don't see your crew for another 4 or 5 hours till Courmayeur too. And so you really do go out into the night all on your own. And if you're compromised in any way in a field of this caliber, on terrain this difficult, it is hard to make it to the finish line.
It's daunting.
Of course,
it's daunting to make it to the finish line.
But I think your point is really well made in that there's a lot of athletes who come here to UTMB thinking it's their focus race, but also doing things in training and in other competitions that leave them a little bit too banged up to come to a course like this. One of my biggest learnings from the Hard Rock 100, and something Ryan and Harmony and I have been talking about this morning, is just the importance of being super fresh for races like this. You really have to arrive at a race of this caliber and of this difficulty against this level of competition with a deep sense of being rested. Obviously, we all need to be fit as well, but when you come in only 8 or 9 weeks after going through a 100-mile experience at Western States, a totally different racing experience for at least Jim Walmsley and Tim Tollefson, but then also Brittany Peterson, Beth Pascal,
Ragna DeBots, Audrey Tanguy.
Yep.
We had a lot of those people in there, and I think it's one of those things too. So you got that, or you have people who it's like they start despite not being ready, independent of races. I think that's Mimi Coca. I think that's Kelly Wolf.
Tim Tollefson. I mean,
who had niggles, who had injuries, who maybe didn't get as much training in as they had hoped because of managing that. And so it's one of those things where it's like, Tim said, I wasn't strong enough to not start.
Yep.
That was, I got chills.
Yeah. Isn't that a great point?
I wasn't strong enough to not start. Yep. And that's what he said when we picked him up in the car outside of Courmayeur.
When I talked to him earlier in the week, it was clear to me that he was compromised. He said he hasn't had a pain-free run since Western States. And, without betraying any confidences, I was like, why do it? And I think for him,
because it's UTMB.
Yeah, it is, because it's UTMB. It is the greatest race in the world. He gave it a valiant effort along with the other American men, Jim Walmsley and Tim Frerichs in particular. And again, the Americans just have such a hard time here on the men's side after getting so close in 2017 and 2016, Tim Tollefson being on the podium. Both of those years, the last 3 years for us have been absolutely miserable on the men's side. Of course, Courtney Dauwalter is the shining star of the Americans this year. Also, Katie Scheid, who lives here in France, finished, 8th overall in the women's field.
I think she was 8th or 9th. I think she was 8th. And in a very hard day for her. Obviously, she was top 5, I think, in her first go in 2019. We've also had Americans like Casey Lichtig and Kat Bradley in the top 10 over the last 3 years, or 3 editions of the race as well. So it's like the American women seem to figure it out. And it might just be because they tough it out through the attrition.
Yep.
And if you can tough it out through the attrition, given that the last 3 editions of this race have been heavy attrition races, you can make your way into that top 10.
Yep.
And so
it's so true. It's so true. And I mean, look at Hannes Namberger. I mean, he's a great up and coming athlete, but he ran a smart race, and he wasn't up in that front pack that we saw running through Les Zouches and through Saint-Gervais at breakneck speed. He came through, finished 6th place, just got it done. And, a good young up and coming athlete gets around the mountain for the first time. Will take that experience into future races and will do very well as a result. But it's a great example of not getting caught up in that front pack early in the men's race, making it around the mountain and finishing with a top 6 position as a result. So shout out to Hannes.
Yeah, I mean,
great run from him.
We went into this race being like, who's going to be the first American to win UTMB? And our top American male instead was Luke J, finishing in 34th. Position overall, which is,
so our top 3 American finishers were Courtney Dauwalter, then Luke J in 34th, and then Katie Scheid in, I think, 52nd. So, again, American men did not come to party this year. We haven't performed up to our standards at this race in a few years now. And I think as, we've sort of matured as a country, I think, the competitive depth that we have in the U.S., there's no excuse for us to not be able to perform at this race. We didn't have a lot of our top runners here this year. Really, our top professional contingent on the men's side was Jim, Tim, and Tim Frerichs, who definitely are world-class on their own, but all 3 of them, I think, came in a little bit compromised and weren't able to make it to the finish line. So anyway, we are learning I think, Jim would be the first to admit that if he's going to have a shot to win this race, which I think he will in his career, I think there's no doubt Jim Walmsley has the talent to win this race. He cannot do Western States earlier in the summer. It needs and deserves his full attention. And when he gives it that, I think Jim Walmsley will win this race at some point in his career. And then I think the last other thing I wanted to just mention here that's just been rattling in my brain is that I think, honestly, the Western States UTMB double is harder than the Hard Rock UTMB double, as counterintuitive as that may seem, because Hard Rock is such a hard race that takes the winner 7 hours longer than the Western States winner. Just the fact that it's more similar in terms of terrain and climbing and descending, where Western States is a very fast and hot race, requires totally different preparation. I think that was reflected in the high attrition rate from those athletes who did run Western States and attempted to do the double. I can't think of a single person who managed to do it successfully this week.
I mean, Emily Hawgood, I think, was the only successful double, with finishing 7th at Western States and then 10th here.
And what was she? 6 hours behind.
6 hours. Yeah, I think it was
so
6 hours.
The women's top 10 was separated by 6 hours.
A huge spread.
Huge
yeah,
margin.
it was 6 hours and 6 minutes was the spread between Courtney in first and Emily Hawgood in 10th. So it's like that's a lot of time. That is not, I think, a traditional first to 10th spread in a race like this, in a race of this caliber. And one thing that we should
it shouldn't be that widespread.
And the men's race was more narrow. The men's race was definitely more narrow. And I think one thing to add too is that we can get really caught up in our American bubble and our American race scene. And yes, our top runners, when they do come to Europe, they can and do and have historically, things like Lavaredo have performed well, and the American women here have performed well. We've seen great performances at other distances this week as from the Americans, more so than UTMB. And maybe that's just like the Western States CCC double is better, but
I'm trying to think of the other top American performance this week, aside from Courtney Dauwalter and Katie Scheid. And the only other thing that comes to my mind is Hayden Hawks, who finished 5th in the OCC under the previous course record time. So
yeah, and then Abby Hall, I think.
Abby Hall, of course,
second in CCC, running a super solid race. I think those were our top performances. Hayden, yes, finishing 5th, but under the course record, I think was really, really impressive.
So one of the other storylines that you sort of mentioned already as we sort of transition away from the main UTMB race breakdown is the dominance of the French all week. So we saw a French winner on the women's side of TDS. We saw 2 of the top 3 in OCC on the women's side were French. We saw Thibaut Garivier and Thibaut Baronian both on the podium of the men's race in CCC. And then, of course, we saw the top 5 men in UTMB, all Frenchmen, and Camille Bruyas, of course, finishing 2nd on the women's side. The French. That is the story, I think, of the professional fields this week.
3 in the top 10 of UTMB as well. So they ended up, I think, with over 50% of the combined top 10 for men and women in UTMB. But here, and maybe the French just have a dominance in the sport of ultra running. I think it's easy to think that I think we are here racing obviously through several countries, but I think it's easy to forget that this is a very global race. It is the best French men and women. It is the best Spanish men and women, the Germans, the Italians. We've got Asian representation coming out of Japan and Hong Kong this week. So it's one of those things where it's, when we race in the U.S., yes, we have this dominance, but we are one big country.
Yep.
And I think when we come over to the European stage, yes, UTMB skews a little bit French in part because it is such a powerful race in the French culture, but it is an international race. Yeah. I think we can construe a country versus a continent. And this is not even a continental championship. This is an international, global championship.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we give it the respect it deserves in that sense. If it is going to be the international, the global championship, we have to treat it as such and really bring our A game and be careful with how our season lines up going into that.
Let's hope this is finally our learning opportunity where our best athletes will give this race the attention and respect that it deserves. I certainly hope to be back on the starting line here at UTMB at some point, and that's definitely something that's going to be front of mind for me. Corrine, just a couple more sort of storylines that I wanted to sort of point out from earlier in the week. I just want to mention one athlete, Thibaut Garivier, the men's champion of CCC. I'm so impressed with this guy, 31 years old. He was second at CCC 2 years ago. He had just a beautiful finish line interview when he won this year, where he devoted his victory to the Czech athlete who perished during the TDS. To me, he feels like the next Francois Dane. My prediction is Thibaut Garivier, the men's champion of CCC. In the next 5 years, he will win UTMB himself. He is sort of, as I said, the next Francois coming up through the ranks of the French athletes, having an incredible victory here at the CCC. Flawless execution, winning convincingly.
Yeah, won convincingly, and he said, he dedicated his win to the fallen Czech runner because they were both 35, and I think it hit close to home that could be any of us. I think sometimes when these tragedies happen, it's easy to think it couldn't be you, and so I think that was a good note to bring for him to say, hey, this is all of us, this is any of us. But his convincing win over Scotty Hawker and then his countryman in third was a really impressive race to watch.
So one other thing, Corrine, before we sign off here, unless you have other things you want to talk about, we sort of spoke about this on air during our broadcast, but one of the unique things that was part of this year's UTMB is that the top two finishers are going to be awarded golden tickets to the Western States 100. We will see if Courtney or Francois accept those tickets, but certainly we would both love to see them back at Western States, but also Aurélien Dunod-Pyllars on the men's side, earning a ticket to Western States. That would be his first running. Also Camille Brouillas, both of them French. I'd love to see both of them come to the U.S. to race Western States. If not, those tickets will, of course, move down.
If anyone in the top five, so the tickets can roll down right through fifth place. If any of those Frenchmen take the ticket, I am so excited. And then we were talking too, like, oh, will Courtney take it? We don't know. So Camille, I so hope we get to see her over there. But if
my
not,
feeling is that she would take it.
But if not, getting Mimi Kotka on that line would not be sad about that.
That would be great.
That would be super. So yes, that's the first time this has ever happened. I'm sure they'll make maybe a deal about it during the awards ceremony later this afternoon here in the Valley. But I am thrilled to see how the Western States start line starts to stack up as our golden ticket races start ahead of the lottery for the first time ever this year.
Yep. Corrine, it was so fun to work together again this week. We had such a blast. Are you going to race next year or what?
Yeah. How are we going to rock, paper, scissors for this?
I am racing next year. I am on record now. Unless I get into Hard Rock, I am racing UTMB next year. Okay, this was such a fun week.
I'm hoping you get into Hard Rock so that I can race UTMB next year. I think I will race something here next year, either CCC or UTMB. I think it's kind of up to my team a little bit there. Yeah. We've got too many competitive women that will be taking the start line, but we'll have the rock, paper, scissors for all the future races so that we can figure out how we talk about them and who gets to race what. Well, again, it was such a joy to work with you. My voice hurts. This is going to be a big come down after a emotional but incredibly fun week. High fives. We did it. Thank you guys all for listening. We appreciate you being part of our live coverage. We appreciate you listening to these podcasts as well. For Corrine Malcom, I am Dylan Bowman. We'll see you guys soon.